Hey everybody, good evening. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-elect Vanessa Brown, and I am your host and moderator for this evening. I'm very happy to be here with you. Welcome Facebook Live, welcome YouTube, welcome Twitter, welcome LinkedIn. We are happy that you're here tonight. Do me a big favor and start sharing with all that you know about this great conversation that's about to take place. And truly, it is a great conversation. But you know that I like to ask you all the same question every week. Where are you watching from? Shout it out. Put it in the chat. Put it in the message so that we can see where you're watching from. I see people are coming on now as we continue to share and let folks know about the show. And so start letting me know where you're coming from. I can see you. Welcome, 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 welcome. Of course, our dear friend Chuck Hunt is with us from Monroe, Louisiana. Welcome, 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 welcome. And we have folks coming from everywhere. So here we go. St. Louis, Missouri is in the house. South Carolina is in the house. Colleen, Texas is in the house. Oh, I love it so much. I'm seeing you all. Tell me where you're from. West Virginia is here with us tonight. Columbus, Ohio is here. New Jersey is here holding it down. Yes, hold it down, New Jersey. San Mateo, California is here. Riverside, California is with us. Akron, Ohio is here tonight. Rancho, California is here. DC is here. Welcome, everybody. Connecticut is in the house. Northern California is here with us on tonight. We're so glad that you're here watching. I see you. Pastor Joseph Devlin Jr. is with us, watching from Tavares, Florida. Thank you. Good evening, Dallas, Texas. I see you, Maya. Harlem, New York is here. Falling Waters, West Virginia. Joanne Ludy. Bishop-elect Sonia Williams is representing the ATL. Again, California, never can be defeated. Santa Barbara, California is here. North Carolina, Boston. Oh my God, we're from everywhere. Chi-Town, Antonio, bless you. Thank you for being here tonight. We've got, again, New York City is in the house and people are sharing. And I really do appreciate that. It means a lot to us as far as it relates to Beyond the Gatekeepers. We want as many people that can and will to get on the show with us and be here on tonight. Such a powerful conversation. Keep letting me know where you're from. We have a couple of pages going on. A lot of you are here on Bishop Yvette Flunder's page, but of course, Beyond the Gatekeepers has its own page. And so if you're watching from there, we say welcome to you. ATL, yes, Jamal Guiden, bless you. Thank you for being here tonight. Virginia is here. Again, Columbia, South Carolina is here. Come on and represent all these states here. We want to be everywhere in your households and want to be sharing with your friends and family about what we're doing tonight. This conversation is important. This conversation is important. So if there are friends and family that you know that should be on, we want you to invite them to come and be with us on this evening. Invite them to come and be with us on this evening. We're looking forward to this conversation on tonight with this great author that we have that's with us. I'm sharing in all of my groups, because there are people that are part of the groups and they like to hear this conversation and like to hear Bishop Flunder and Bishop Pearson, as well as whoever our guests are. And I'm so grateful for tonight's guest. Namaste to you, Joy Palmer. Thank you so much for being on with us tonight. What I love about our show is that we have people from all races, all creeds, all nationalities. Everybody doesn't always agree, but some people do, and majority of us do. And if you don't, it's still okay. We want you to be a part of this conversation on tonight. And so I'm going, without any further ado, I want to go on and bring on our guest tonight. And so tonight we have Katherine Stewart. She's a journalist and an author, and I am so glad to have her. She's going to be talking about her book tonight, The Power Worshippers. And it says, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. This is a powerful book. It was recommended to me by Apostle Edward Donaldson, and so I very much appreciate it. I enjoyed it. And so, Katherine, do me a favor and just greet our audiences that are on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vanessa, Bishop Flunder, Bishop Pearson. I'm so grateful to all of you for having me for this important discussion. I want to thank all of you tuning in from all over. I'm excited to be here, and I'm really looking forward to your questions and I want to hear your perspectives as well. So let's get going.
This is wonderful. We thank you so much, and we welcome Warren Reno. Reno, Nevada is here. Warren, thank you for being with us on tonight. Remember to keep shouting out where you're from. And so certainly we want to keep moving on with the program. And so we have none other than Bishop Carlton D. Pearson. He's an author, progressive spiritual teacher, and thought leader. And we are so grateful for his presence on tonight. Glad that he is here. Bishop Pearson, please greet our audience tonight.
Good evening, everybody. As always, it's a privilege to be here. And if there's ever a program that you need to watch, it's this one tonight. This may be one of the most critical discussions that we've had in the 2 years I've been guest hosting here, because what the subject matter regards the future of this country, the present of this country, and its past. This is an investigative reporter, and there is a takeover, a coup still in place. And it's based in religion, the same religion that created slavery and maintained it for 200 years, and another 200 years since that with Jim Crow type mentalities. I don't know that anyone has probably done the kind of research that Ms. Katherine has, but you got to hear it. I can't wait to hear what she says. This one book, for sure, I got to have it. I got to read all of it, and I want to have her on my show too. This is very important. Thank you for your work, Ms. Stewart. It's what the nation needs.
Well,
we got to get this everywhere, and we will. We will.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Bishop. And Bishop Flunder will be with us shortly. I want to say that it's very important, as Bishop Pearson has said, regarding this conversation. And the book is called The Power Worshippers. All right. So I'm going to tell you right away, if you want to go and purchase the book, you can purchase the book on Amazon. There are other outlets that have the book. We want to make sure that you purchase the book. We also want to let you know we're going to give away a book on tonight, courtesy of Katherine Stewart. So we're grateful for that on tonight. And so, Katherine, I want to get right down to it. If I can. And I want to talk to you about the reason that you wrote this book. But before I do that, I feel like our audience needs to really understand and let's be straightforward. What is religious nationalism? Let's first say that.
Well, religious nationalism in America, or as it's often referred to as Christian nationalism, it's not a religion. It's basically the idea that America was founded as a Christian nation and our laws should be based on the Bible. So it's the idea that we've somehow moved away from this conception of America. It ties the idea of America to very particular religious and cultural identities. And it says that the supposedly right kind of Americans need to take it back. And it matters because Christian nationalism is not on the fringes of American political life. This is a movement that put Donald Trump in power in 2016 and back to
I was waiting for you to say that right there.
Yeah. And, they appeared to be determined to continue with the politics of Trumpism in the near future. So it's not just an ideology, it's also a political movement, an organized quest for power. And it's radically anti-democratic, but it has this very deep organizational infrastructure, and that's what makes it as strong as it is. So they've invested for decades in right-wing activist groups and messaging organizations, policy groups, legal advocacy groups, networking organizations that get the leadership on the same page. This is very much a leadership-driven movement. And what they do is they mobilize the votes of a large subsection of Americans and get them to vote for the candidates that the movement favors.
This is good information. I hope that our listeners and those who are watching are taking it all in. Again, the book is called Power Worshippers. And so to my next question, and then I'm going to let Bishop Pearson chime in as well. The Power Worshippers has a broader reach, a broader scope, right? It examines the rise and the reach of religious nationalists, right? Or basically, that's why I asked for you to explain it, who in America are mostly Christian, right? Why did you decide to write this book? Because you wrote this book for a very specific reason.
Well, in 2009, I was living in Santa Barbara, California, with my husband and our kids. My daughter was about 6 years old, in attending a local public school, and I discovered something called a Good News Club was coming to our public elementary schools. Now, Good News Clubs install themselves in elementary schools. They target children in their very earliest years of learning with a message that without Jesus, they're going to go to hell. And they're extremely, it confuses little kids into thinking that the religion of the Good News Club is sponsored and endorsed by the school. Mm-hmm. And I could see that in public schools where Good News Clubs had been established, kids were starting to bully other kids. They would say, they'd say, you're going to go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus. And I know it must be true because they taught it to me in school. Oh. And it was also espousing an extremely reactionary form of religion. An independent researcher did a study of their 5-year curriculum that was taught in every Good News Club from coast to coast and found thousands of references to sin, hell, and obedience, and only 2 or 3 glancing references to the golden rule or the royal law, loving your neighbor as yourself. So it's a very particular form of religion, but frankly, any kind of club trying to confuse little kids into thinking that their school endorses religion is inappropriate in a diverse public school environment, So I got really curious about this club. I thought, well, this just seems inappropriate in a diverse public school setting. It's causing all this drama in public school communities where, we're talking about little kids here, Right. We need to set aside our religious agendas in diverse public schools and come together in support of our kids and their education. And so I went to their national convention in Alabama. I went through one of their training programs. I just became really curious about, the legal background, that had the legal strategy that had allowed them to be placed in public schools. So I just did a lot of research. The more I learned about Good News Clubs and the sponsoring organization, the Child Evangelism Fellowship, the more concerned I became. I could see that these Good News Clubs had this, their leadership was incredibly hostile to the notion of public schools to begin with. They would call public schools government schools and talk about kicking in the doors. And they had no respect for diversity or equality. They reject the principles, those principles that represent the best of the American promise. And I could see that they were actually, their aims were much larger. They weren't just trying to, frankly, put their clubs in public schools. They were trying to destroy public education. And the attack on public education, I could see, was just one small part of a larger attack on America as a modern constitutional democracy with principles, ideals of equality and pluralism, imperfectly carried out over time, of course, but these are ideals for us to work toward. So I just kept digging deeper. You know, my early training was in investigative journalism, and in 2012 I published a book about the religious rights attack on public education. And in 2020, you know, I kept digging over the years and published The Power Worshippers as a much broader picture.
Excellent. You know, and we could say more about what they've done, even as it relates to, I mean, I believe, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but religious nationalists must be behind critical race theory as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got so much to say about that. You know, over the past dozen years, I've been researching this movement. I go to all these right-wing strategy gatherings and conferences and meetings. And a few years ago, I've been going to Ralph Reed's Road to Majority conference every year, every couple of years for all this time. And in 2021, speaker after speaker decried critical race theory. They're standing up there and talking about how, you know, we got to be talking about critical race theory. Now, this is an example of a manufactured controversy. The first and most important thing to know about critical race theory is that it has never been part of primary or secondary education in the United States, but it's been deliberately used to stir up, to race bait, right? To stir up anxieties over kids' identity and public education on all sides. I have a friend who's a second grade math teacher in a school district who in Santa Maria, California, who tells me that they're regularly approached by parents who are saying, are you teaching critical race theory in public schools? And this teacher teaches second grade math. I mean, this is just preposterous, but the anti-CRT hysteria has been very effective, politically speaking. And I think that people like Gary Youngkin, who's the governor of Virginia, got elected in part because of the weaponization of CRT as an identity issue. But so here's the important thing to remember about CRT. It was basically constructed by a fellow named Christopher Rufo. He's a conservative activist with the right-wing think tank, the Manhattan Institute. And he architected this as a new front in the culture wars. And he said this about his opponents on Twitter. He said, the goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and think immediately of critical race theory. We have decodified the term, he said, and he said, we'll recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. So essentially, he's saying it has nothing to do with real CRT. What it's being done is used to tap into a range of the anxieties. And it serves as a distraction by the religious right in the ways that they are denying people fundamental rights. They're denying the consequences of elections they don't like. They're engaging in race-based gerrymandering, voter suppression. They're trying to deny people the right to vote, the right to privacy.
You name it, they're doing it.
They backed a coup attempt. It's a radically anti-democratic movement. So.
Thank you so much, Katherine. We want to acknowledge the incoming of Bishop Yvette Flunder. We're so very happy that you are here, Bishop Flunder. And we're talking about the power worshipers, something that you and Bishop Pearson know a lot about, right? Christian nationalism. And so, Bishop Flunder, if you wouldn't mind just saying what you know, then Bishop Pearson, you come in. I really want you to talk about, Bishop Pearson, what you've seen being with the fundamental crew, because they are part of the power worshipers.
Well, let Bishop Pearson precede me.
Okay.
Bishop
Yes, sir.
Vanessa,
Bishop Pearson.
because there's a few reflections I'd like to have on what Katherine has said just a moment ago.
Absolutely.
So, please,
I was 1 year old when the Constitution, the decision to enact the Brown versus Board of Education decision was made. But I didn't see busing or integration until the late 60s. And I remember how difficult that was for all of us. And when that was enforced, the Christian school thing, including ORU, burst into existence. And they were afraid of course, hippies and drugs and integration primarily. And so right away, Christians began to pull away from the normal flow of our cultural society and create their own world. I've been involved in that world and was somewhat complicit to it for many, many years, until the longer I stayed in it, the more I realized there was so much racism and bigotry and arrogance in the white evangelical Christian mindset about controlling the country. I've said many times, Ms. Stewart, that most Christians have gotten King James and King Jesus mixed up. They think they're the same king. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all the creatures. They'll never see us as anything but creatures and or critters or monsters. And so pulling away, they saw Black integration of the neighborhoods, schools, Black leaders, mayors, sheriffs. They start getting afraid. 50 years of abortion, and now the white race is smaller than it's ever been and is becoming a minority in this country. And there's a public panic. Make America great again means make America hate again, legally, separate, segregate, desecrate, if you want. And so we're facing maybe the greatest civil war since the original Civil War, where more Americans were killed than any other war, all the wars combined, including the Revolutionary War. There's a violence out there, and they base the violence on the kingdom of God suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. That's what January 6th was. Then they hire a Hitler type guy. They vote in and one of the smartest idiots we've ever had in leadership in this country. That's Donald Trump. I used to say the devil. I'm just saying now the Donald. And they know he's wrong, and they know he's lying, but he fits their need. He was raised up to expose what you are identifying that needs to be expelled from our country. And your book is a good template for that. And I feel I've never felt more threatened in my life and as American as I do right now with Christian nationalism. And I went in the Herbert W. Bush White House and George White House and laid hands on them and prayed for them and prophesied that they'd be the leaders. And when Reagan became president in 1980, I joined the Republican Party, and boy, we were going to really push the Christian thing because we own the truth and own the gospel, have the keys to the kingdom. We decide who goes to heaven and hell, and we got to keep this thing white, clean, and waspy. So you're onto something very, very powerful, and I'm 100% behind what you're saying, and I think we need to probably have to do more than one program on this, because this is a very, not only powerful, but it's critical information that when you talk about.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. You ready?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
I think that what I have gotten from my listening to the news for the last couple of days in relationship to Donald and Letitia, let's put it that way, to Donald Trump having to respond to the district attorney.
That's my girl.
Yeah, she's tough. When she keeps talking, she starts sounding like the women in my family. She starts off really professional, and then she starts speaking pure Black, Katherine. She just says, because honey, because starts turning into that, But I lift it up because in order essentially for the same law, when I listened to the tapes of when Donald Trump was talking about people taking the fifth. Why do you have to take the fifth if you're innocent? If you're telling the truth, why do you have to take the fifth? He said it over and over and over again in relationship to other people taking the fifth, essentially. And then, of course, he spent 6 hours taking the fifth in his conversations with Letitia, with the district attorney, I realized that in the eyes of people, when they take this turn to make this person their prophet, their representative of God, their warrior, wrong becomes right, right becomes wrong. Essentially, if he does it, it's okay. If someone else does it, it's not okay. And it can be the same thing. That part really doesn't matter. The point is that if he does it, it's okay. If he does it, and the amazing ways in which they give justification to that is always, it's not new news. It is fascinating to me to listen to, because it's redundant. It happens over and over every time we have seen a despot. Someone can shoot someone 5 times with a gun and it was right. Someone else can shoot someone 5 times with a gun and it was wrong, depending upon the decision that was made by those who saw or were a part or were aware of what it was. What does this mean to me and mine? It's the same reality as a well-heeled white young man can hit 3 people and kill them. And someone else can hit 3 people in a black neighborhood and kill them. They're going to go to jail for the rest of their lives. This young man is going to get off because he has, what do we call it? Affluenza.
Affluenza.
Right? And he has a really good lawyer. And he has a whole lot of money. And his daddy knows the judge and 5 people on the jury or something like that. And something. So there is no real clear blueprint in our nation right now for what is right and what is wrong, what is correct and what is incorrect. All of it is situational and depending on whether or not people essentially have the power of their position to make right wrong and wrong right, as we may see it, right? So this is one other thing to my mind. I wrote a note to myself and I said, what will the whole world, this nation, but also those that are following our example, to Bishop Pearson's point, what will the whole world and the generations that are coming after us, the children of the folks that are making these mistakes and errors, what will they think of their parents and their leaders when they look, because they are looking closely? What will they think? And I guess the question that I'm really asking is, how do they think that their young people are not paying attention? Correct. And are not seeing and are not essentially responding to religious nationalists and knowing that they are religious nationalists, right? How do they think that they're making a better world? This is not a better world for their children. This is a flash in the pan for a group of angry, predominantly white nationalist men. A flash in the pan. Even their women who are racist women, because there are some racist women that are not going to let you tell them that they have to have a baby that they don't want to have.
That's right.
They're going to push back because they could care less about me as an African American. But when you start telling them that them and their daughters are not going to be able to graduate from college because they're pregnant, they're coming for you, whoever you are. So I guess the long shot is such a huge sacrifice to make for a short shot. You feel me, Bishop Pearson? What do they think the long shot in your thinking, Katherine, will be from this very obvious reality that we are facing right now? What do you think they think will be the real long-term outcome when their children come of age?
Well, thank you, Bishop Flunder. That's a really amazing question. And look, what we're seeing is how authoritarian works. and has worked around the world and throughout history when, you know, and then I'm going to get back to what I think that they want and what they think they're going to get. And, you know, by building this authoritarianism, you know, when you see leaders like Putin in Russia, or we saw it with Mussolini in Italy, and you see it with Viktor Orban in Hungary, or you see it with Erdogan in Turkey, when these leaders bind themselves very tightly to reactionary religious figures in their own country to consolidate authoritarian forms of political power. We can recognize this as religious nationalism. Sometimes you could call it like ethno-authoritarianism. Like, there are different words that we can, or terms we can use to describe what we're seeing, but it's nothing new. You know, it's absolutely nothing new. It's happened over time throughout history. And look, I think the leaders of the movement think they're going to get three things, right? They want power for themselves and their political allies. They want policies that privilege people with certain approved religious, cultural, and political viewpoints. They want government to direct its contempt to those who are different and who disagree with their agenda and who happen to have different identities and different viewpoints. But I think to a very unappreciated degree, this is a movement motivated by money. They want access to private money. A lot of the funders of the movement are members of, I would say, plutocratic, ultra-wealthy, often extended families. I'm thinking about like the Prince DeVos family, or the Wilkes brothers in Texas, or the Green family, or so many others that the Lindsays, so many other of these hyper-wealthy funders of the religious right that I've written about in The Power Worshippers and elsewhere. But they also are really motivated by a grab for public money. They want the taxpayer to fund their initiatives. They want taxpayer funding for their churches, for their, in all these different ways, for their religious schools, so that they can, you know, go after what they call the harvest, which is, you know, other people's children. That's what the leaders of the Good News Club call. They say, you know, take the you know, the harvest is fruitful in the mission fields of the public schools. You can see that bid for public money, I think, most in its most naked form in the way that they're pursuing the destruction of public education and efforts to direct taxpayer money to schools that they lead into, religious schools. But they want public money in all of these other ways. And they got a lot of that with Donald Trump. You know, he gave them everything they wanted and more. He threw open the doors of access. He gave them policies that privileged certain groups of people and certain religious viewpoints. And he also opened the floodgates of public money in their direction. So, you know, the movement long preceded Donald Trump, and it will long outlast him. But he did give it a lot of sort of heft.
And with this group, the end justifies the means. By any means possible, get and keep control of the country, the culture, the consciousness, the Congress. And they believe it's with religious passion, like the zealots of the Inquisition, the witch hunters, which Trump uses that very easily. These people are so focused on doing what they do, they actually feel empowered and enabled by God. It's a religious, worshipful thing for them to keep America safe and white dominated and Christian dominated. In God we trust, even though it's more guns that they trust. But there will be blood in the streets before this is over. If they don't prosecute Donald Trump, there's going to be anarchy like we've never seen in the country, in the history of this country. And if they do, you're going to see war, literal war in the streets. They're gearing up for it now. We have more guns than we have people in this country, than we have cars, and there are assault weapons. You don't weaponize a country with assault weapons unless you expect the country to assault itself. We're not talking about Arabs and Muslims and other Europeans. We're talking about Americans killing Americans, and just to keep control. And these people would rather die than give up their power. And they'd rather kill or steal or lie.
Just one thing. I'm looking at you, Bishop like Vanessa. I know what that means.
It's okay. It's fine.
I know what she's about to do when she starts looking like that. So before you ask that question, I agree with everything that I've heard my colleagues share, my kinfolks share while we're having this conversation. And it still kind of takes me back to the idea that high is only high if low cares about it. If low, high is a construct. You know, that and if essentially enough people in this country don't want to do what it is that they're talking about doing, and we have a civil war that really divides the nation yet again. The some of the wealthiest states in the union, like California, 6% of the whole gross national profit of the whole world. Okay, in terms of what happens if they lose simply because the group of people who don't want to think that way want a country of their own, and they split the country. It's no fun if it's just you and yours. It's only fun. High can only be high if somebody is low.
Low. Good point.
And if the people who are low side, you know, really honestly, if that's what y'all want to do, I tell you what, you just take that and you just go right on ahead and we'll do something else, because we would rather not even fight for what it is that's what you want. And then I wonder, what in God's name are they going to do if there is no body to abuse, nobody to diminish? Because the people have gone on and created for themselves something else. We're almost divided down the middle. What does that mean? How does so I want to put that out there too as a question of.
I think that's good, and it might lead to this, Bishop Flunder, to Katherine, to Bishop Flunder, and to Bishop Pearson. The midterms are coming. They are right around the corner. We know that conservative-leaning churches are targeting voters with messages about how they need to vote with so-called biblical principles or biblical values. How does this fit in with the movement, Katherine? Because I think we've got to target that. We have to talk about some of what they consider to be strategic planning.
Right. I mean, well, listen, I think about something like January 6th, which was a coup attempt. And we know that there were various groups involved in that, but the movement would not, that I don't think we can fully understand what happened that day without examining the role of Christian nationalism. So first of all, the ideology played a role, because in the minds of a lot of the extremist groups that were involved with the coup attempt, their members were made to believe that Donald Trump was elected by God, was chosen by God to save this nation. So if he was defeated, it must be against God's will. And they've been, one of the things that the movement leaders does over time is cultivate the sense of persecution. They're the most persecuted group in society. They're engaged in a apocalyptic struggle between absolute good and absolute evil, and the consequences of losing are too dire to ignore. And so that made them willing to engage in radical actions and to think of themselves as the true patriots, even as they were attacking the foundations of our democracy, our electoral system, and our Congress and our capital. And but I think also, and this is very underappreciated, it's the networks of Christian nationalism, the movement of Christian nationalism, that actually spread Trump's election lies. And they started almost as soon as he started floating this idea back even before the election, when he was asked during a debate, would you accept the consequences of electoral loss if Joe Biden wins? He said, well, I'm not sure. I mean, what? I mean, it doesn't get any more autocratic than that. I mean, that's, they compare him to, and by the way, a lot of, I went to pastor gatherings subsequently. There's one organization, Faith Wins, they do pastor gatherings in many dozens of states. They've done hundreds of them for thousands of pastors. So I attended this one pastor gathering in Virginia. There were about 40 pastors in attendance. And, you go get the whole, myth of mythical history, et cetera. And, we're in a war. The church is not a cruise ship. The church is a battleship, that kind of thing, trying to get the pastors engaged to turn out their congregations. But with these leaders, including a member of the Council for National Policy and David Barton, there was a guy there who was a member of the Trump administration named Hogan Gidley. He's an elections integrity specialist. And he was spreading all these lies about the election. He was saying, oh, dead people were voting. He said, you saw what happened in Arizona. Well, in Arizona, a Republican-led committee did an investigation of supposed irregularities, and there were none. And they had to admit, oh, there were no irregularities. And actually, they found a couple of dozen extra votes, or maybe a couple hundred extra votes for Biden. But still, the guy's still out there spreading this lie, even though it's been proven untrue by a Republican group. And it really shows the fact that this is a radically anti-democratic authoritarian movement. That's why they were referred to Trump as a biblical king, like King Cyrus, an imperfect ruler through whom God chose to enact his will. Well, here's the thing about kings. They are not kings of democracy. They don't have to obey the law. They're rule unto themselves. It's my way or the highway. They don't have to be moral or consistent or anything like that. They get to make up the rules. And that makes Trump and people like Trump sort of a perfect ruler for an autocracy. And I think he appeals to the authoritarian impulses of many of his supporters.
Thank you, Katherine. And I want to say, I think this is also going to lead to something. One of our listeners has a question, and she is asking, she says, how does this movement propagate homophobia, racism, and sexism to increase its power?
Well, all of it. I'm sure Bishops Flunder and Pearson have seen this firsthand, but I'd be happy to talk about it as well. Okay, great. Well, I go to these conferences and strategy gatherings, values voter summits. That's a group that the Family Research Council and its partners used to put on with thousands of leading activists and strategists and allied politicians. And you see it right there. You see the speakers get up there, and they're very coded. I think that they, for a lot of white people in the movement, for instance, when they talk about, America's founded as a Christian nation, they don't want to think of themselves as racist. So the racism is very implicit rather than explicit. So when they're talking about America's Judeo-Christian history, they're referring to an America that everybody sort of with a wink and a nod understands is implicitly white, right? They're talking about that. But, it's interesting. Leaders of the movement, the sort of more far-sighted leaders, they can see the demographics very clearly, and they understand that they're very sensitive to accusations of racism, and they are trying to recruit conservative-leaning pastors of color, Black and Latino pastors, where they can, in order to, number one, get their congregations, especially in swing districts. There's a special effort with, Latino pastors often in Pentecostal or neo-charismatic, leading Pentecostal or neo-charismatic congregations in swing states, because they know, elections always won on the margins. So they're doing what they can. So the last Road to Majority conference that I attended, it's Ralph Reed's annual gathering. He's a very seasoned and astute leaders of the movement. There were, I would say, maybe, can't remember what the percentage was of the speakers, but they're just very large number of speakers of color, maybe 30%, maybe 30 to 40%. And most of them stood up and decried critical race theory. I mean, they're really, it's a real manipulation. And
I was involved, excuse me for interrupting, I didn't mean to, Katherine. I don't want this point to be missed. I was involved with the initiation of the faith-based initiative with 10 of the largest Black pastors in America. All of us had mega churches and were on television, had huge influence. They allocated $10 million a piece to us. And they were, fat belly redneck guys with big checkbooks.
Wait, Bishop Pearson, how much money did you just say?
10 million apiece for 10 different locations and influences. That's what was discussed. I could name the preachers. You'd know only one of them, I think, has transitions did now. But I smelled a rat, and I talked privately with some of these guys. They were underwriting us to make us dependent on them so they could control our voices and our influence. That group, it's like a cabal. They create their own giants and or monsters, and they let one or two black entertainers, whoever, get all the shows, all the hype, all the popularity, and then they own them. Notice how you've not heard very much from any of the largest name black preachers or entertainers about this whole critical race theory. You've heard nothing about, they never speak against Trump publicly. This is a well-organized plan, and it's not recent, it's old. And you're really peeping their card with this book, Katherine. It's like you snuck up on them, and now you heard them, you read their texts, and you eavesdropped. But I know that this is a plan because they were going to give us this money. And I know the Greens, who have our university here now, they've given money to a lot of preacher friends of mine. I didn't know they were doing it. They give them big money, and these guys are growing in influence, and they have an audience. And when they pick up the phone and say, we need you in Washington, we need you in Atlanta, we need you to say this or not say this, they don't say it because they're the biggest donors to those men's ministries, and you can't afford to lose them without going under. They've been planning this a long time. We're up against some really strategic warriors who plan to win, and so far they are. The Supreme Court they own judges, they're putting in their own attorney generals across the nation, and the Democrats are watching them do this and barely saying anything about it. Nobody would say even as much as I've just said, and a lot of them know this because I'm exposed. Now, the other part is victim consciousness and sin consciousness. Does somebody question Bishop-elect? The whole idea of abortion or same gender, the LGBT community, or marriage equality, all that stuff are key words that trigger the Christian right. If you talk about it, that's the progressives, and as they say, the liberals, they want to cut us down. In the state of Oklahoma, there's not one GOP, and they just had having an election next week. There's not one GOP candidate that doesn't invoke the name of Trump and use terms like family values, biblical morality, faith. All you have to do in this state is say faith. That means Christian. They're all anti-Semitic. They're all homophobic. They're all racist. And I walked and worked with these people, prayed with these people, preached to them, for them, and with them. I know what I'm talking about. And you have highlighted it so well, but I can speak from experience. They have a plan, and they're willing to die for their plan. And that is the worst threat to the integrity of our democracy and our republic in the world. It is not Islam. It's not foreigners. It's not Hispanics or Haitians coming across the border. That will up the number of ethnicities and the voters in this country. It is these white supremacist nationalists of any category who want to own the country, and they're going to go down with a fight. I've been warning people. There will be, I hate to say it, there's going to be blood in the streets because these people are prepared, and they're actually eager to fight. They want civil war. Charles Manson, back in the 60s, he did what he did, trying to create a race war. Do you remember that? He just died in his 80s. He was in prison for 40 years, but that was part of his plan. So this isn't a new idea. This is an old idea, or at least a long-term, several decades plan. So we're up against something really, really confrontive and combative.
So there's a couple of things. I just got through watching another special on Jim Jones and the People's Temple. And because I was born and raised in San Francisco, I remember when he first started doing what it is that he did. And the way he began his work was to reach out for people of color, particularly people who were marginalized, people who were seniors and ill, families where there was a single mother and 2 or 3 children and so forth, and hungry people who needed housing. He became a councilman and part of the board of supervisors and that kind of thing in San Francisco. I had a wonderful political circle of people who thought that perhaps he was going to be mayor or vice mayor of the city because he was so popular. And somewhere along the way, he got sort of drunk with power, such that he started to drink the Kool-Aid, and really believe that he really was all of the things, every prophet in the Bible, just about, he was over time, if you understand what I'm saying, especially every warrior prophet, right? And when it was found out that he was bilking the people, to your point, Bishop Pearson, and to your point also, Katherine, when it was found out that he was bilking the people, then he started to call down fire from heaven and start talking about his enemies and how they, this and that, this and that. Then he packed up all those people, some of which belonged to my grandfather's Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal church. I remember one in particular, Mother Coleman, who was a wonderful, sweet, gray-haired, precious member of his church, but of my grandfather's church. But she hooked up with Jim Jones because Jim Jones was helping her to get food and to get food stamps and find a place to live, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, when his backroom use of the people sexually, financially, emotionally was uncovered, then he picked them all up. And I think that when he took them to Guyana, he had every intention of killing them. I think that was what was intended. It was the last major power move. These are my sheep. And there's a part of me that feels like, and for me, it is not generational, it's the next generation. It is not the one that is here now. It is the one that is coming up. And then we've talked about this, Bishop Pearson and I. The one that is coming up, who are the children of this beast that has been unleashed on our nation, because they are not
buying in.
They're just not doing it.
Yeah, they won't.
It's just not happening. I talk to them. We talk to them all the time, and it's kind of like what was Trump's assistant, whose daughter was always after her mother's and the husband disagreed with her all the time.
Oh, yeah, Conway's daughter.
Yes, her daughter and her husband. And she was on Donald Trump's lap.
Yeah.
And it amazes me, her daughter would read her for filth. And I thought to myself, for heaven's sake, that energy, those children of European descent, the way they marched the street with Black children and brown children during Black Lives Matter, indicated to me and to us what they are not taking into consideration is that this thing is not being embraced by their young people. And I'll say this, and I'm going to get off this tirade. The fear of the loss of power, right? And the inability to really read us as minorities. And I want to say this, Katherine, because I think that is something that people need to understand about Black folks, about LGBT folks, about people of color, period, is that we're accustomed in some ways to this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the folks that are being chosen to be our spokespersons, Herschel, we never would have gone and gotten Herschel to be anything.
No, I just don't even understand what we could be thinking in Georgia. Y'all not thinking? Oh my goodness.
Trump.
Diamond and Silk, Omarosa. Let's just talk for a minute just about this. So to Bishop Pearson's point, to say to Black preachers or to offer to Black preachers money because they need it for their churches, for them to be at least quiet, if not complicit, at least quiet. That means that back room, they are talking about.
Of course.
Spending their money.
Sure.
And talking about them. But the front people, Herschel, who can't conjugate a verb, Herschel Walker. Why would anybody choose him who really understands the power that a real spokesperson in the Black community could have if one could be found? If you understand what it is that I'm trying to say. So I think that terrible mistakes are made, and they're being made because of an assumed power, money notwithstanding, political power notwithstanding, a huge mistake as it relates to young people and the diminishment of the political savvy of communities of color. We shall overcome. We've done it before. And as God lives, we'll see ourselves through this fight. We have much more to gain, essentially, to fight this fight than we have to lose. And it's not a smart fight. It's a rich fight, a powerful fight. But I don't think it's a smart fight because they have not properly assessed communities of color.
Plus, when investigative reporters continue their work on the hypocrisy and immorality within the evangelical community, we already know what happened to Boy Scouts. We already know what's happening in the Catholic Church. We already know what the Southern Baptist Church is now finding all this pedophilia and abuse among their ranks. This is a rotten movement. The church is rotting. It is imploding. It is nasty inside, and I've been inside, so I know. Yeah. You guys can grin, the little bobbing heads, and Jesus loves you. Some of these guys are outright narcissistic, bigoted, racist sinners. Adulterers, fornicators, robbers, extortionists, everything that's in their Bibles. And at some point, that's going to come out. I don't know that it will make any difference because right now, we went through the Swagger thing, the Jim Baker thing, and even certain matters around ORU and Oral Roberts. Religion is nasty. We know it, and institutional religion. But I do want some investigative work. I think there are guys out there doing the work, women and men that are behind closed doors. They're doing the research, and when they expose, the imploding will become explosion. Right. Out before the world. That may be one of the main things that are going to undermine and uproot this whole Christian nationalist thing. We've got to expose who these people are, what they really mean, what's behind, right, and their number one motives. And it's not Jesus or salvation or eternal life. It's eternal power and control, right, and money, as Katherine. The love of money is the root of all evil with them. The lack of money is the root of all evil, perhaps in our communities, but the love of money in theirs. And they are very, very well funded. And progressives are not as quick to write checks. That's been my observation. They're not intimidated about losing control.
There's no equivalent to the Federalist Society, which has played an organization that's played this outsized role in shaping the courts. We often hear about groups like the ACLU. Most people know what that is, but they don't know what the the Alliance Defending Freedom is. It's an organization that pursues a sort of far right religious nationalist agenda through the courts, and they have an annual operating budget of over $100 million a year. All 6 Supreme Court judges on the conservative side, conservative. I actually think that I would describe many of their sort of ideas as radical rather than conservative. Mm-hmm. But all 6 of them have current or former ties to the Federalist Society, and 90% of Trump's appellate court nominees had ties to the Federalist Society. So it's just this enormously powerful, incredibly well-funded organization. There's a wonderful investigative report in the Washington Post that showed between 2014 and 2017, about hundreds of millions of dollars flowed into the Federalist Society and related organizations. It's one of its key leaders is Leonard Leo, who sort of is involved with a number of other very closely related organizations. And I mean, we're talking massive amounts of money. When you were talking about hypocrisy, frankly, I think the biggest hypocrisy that I see is the label family values. I mean, this is
Yes.
a movement that's directing support for politicians whose economic policies are making it so much harder for families to succeed. You know, they stand for the American family, and yet for the majority of American families, life is getting harder and harder precisely because of these policies promoted by sort of hard right politicians that, you know, they want low taxes or no taxes for the rich, no regulation of business. You know, a lot of businesses avoid paying any tax at all. Minimal regulation of the environment, minimal, you know, environmental regulation. They're you know, intent on destroying things that most Americans want and need, like access to affordable health care, good public schools, and things like that. So that's where just I see this enormous hypocrisy, but it's hard for people to grasp the alliance between hard right religion and hard right economics. But that's become real hallmark of leaders of this movement. Many of them are, you know, unabashedly on the side of power and capital. And there's history there. I mean,
Yes.
this is something that's happened over time. It goes back to, I would say, the era when you had these pro-slavery theologians who were on the side of the enslavers. They were on the side of, you know, quote unquote capital, human property. And that sort of, you know, we can talk about that, but there's a sort of Christian nationalism that they employed as well. The idea that America was founded as a so-called, you know,
Christian
nation, that hierarchies are established by God, that our laws should be based on the Bible. And they endorsed that sort of a very reactionary form of religion and used it to justify slavery.
And they're
still using it.
Group, there's a small group comparatively of very smart, shrewd strategists who manipulate the ignorance. And ignorance doesn't just mean to not know, it means to not notice or refuse to make note of. They ignore the obvious. Trump is obviously a narcissist, obviously a psychopath, but they just ignore it. But these smart people who are corporate executives and are in high political offices and are teaching some of the great schools, they know what they're doing and they use their power. They keep these folk dumb. Half of them don't even watch the news. Millions of Americans responsible don't pay attention to the news at all. But these people know, they've studied how dumb and insensitive, or excuse these crude terms, stupid we generally are as a public, particularly in the interior of the country, in the rural areas. The further you get away from the coast, the more you find blanket Appalachian type mentalities. That's frightening. The little small farm mentality, a Bible, a church, a school, a PTA meeting, you know, Boy Scout troop, and all that little simple stuff. These folks are so gullible and so gushing about what they think is their right. So we got to find these top people, expose them for what they believe. I saw it when I was involved in the fundamentalist right-wing Republican Party. I was one of the few blacks in it, as you well know, Bishop Flunder. And yes. I saw the inside. And I can tell you, they have not backpedaled one bit. They've got a plan, and they know what they're doing. And some of the most respected preachers, theologians, megachurch pastors, moneyed folks are in on this.
Yep.
Unabatedly, unabashedly.
Absolutely.
They're in on it.
Absolutely.
And we're weak around some things.
We're weak around a lot of things, Bishop.
We're really weak around if there's any question about whether this is God's will. If you understand what I'm saying, we're weak around abortion. We're weak around the LGBT community. We're weak around women's rights, yes, essentially. Right. And because we are not strong, we don't have a strong theological since slavery. Let's just put it that way. We haven't really been. This is the generation, it feels to me, again, that is doing more work on really good critique of religion than we have all of my life. I'm 67 years old, and all of my life, I have not witnessed, again, a generation that is determined to do its own theological work. And I have seen people that are like brain surgeons but they'll go to church and have somebody give them trash theology and be okay with it. It's just trash.
Yeah.
And they will not, the holiness, how is it that the holiness of the priest could say that we cannot abide abortion, right? And the cloister is constantly abusing young boys and young girls, in not just in a number that is typical among human beings, okay? But we're talking about what's going on since ever, right?
Yeah.
And there seems to be, we know that the numbers are there. What we cannot find or hear is what is being done about it.
Right.
To make these young people safe. But then this is the same person that can tell me that if I support abortion, I cannot take the Eucharist,
right,
the supper. So we're weak around being self-affirmed theologically. And I want to put that out there because I hear Catherine's heart. We have got to take this opportunity to find a path to God and to good and to justice and to righteousness that is not so easily turned by the things that are the buzzwords: abortion, women, right, gay.
It's so funny you said that because Catherine has a chapter, I think it's chapter 3, that's completely dedicated, well, not totally, but she says a lot. And so you talk about inventing abortion. Inventing abortion. You said Christian nationalists did not invent abortion itself, but they did invent it as a defining political framework. How did that come about, Catherine?
Well, when Roe versus Wade passed, we have to remember that most Protestant Republicans supported it. Barry Goldwater, a great conservative hero, supported a liberalization of abortion law, at least early in his career. Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, signed the most liberal abortion law into the country. When Roe versus Wade passed, Betty Ford called it a great, great decision. The Southern Baptist Convention actually published statements in 1971 and 1974 affirming their support for abortion law liberalization. And they published an op-ed in one of their publications when it passed, calling it, praising the decision, hailing the decision as a sensible middle ground. Abortion at the time was viewed largely as a Catholic issue, but it was often placed within the context of other issues that were actually quite progressive, about helping the poor, and it did not reliably divide Democrats from Republicans, even on the Catholic side. And often people didn't, use that wasn't used as an issue for getting out the vote on right-wing politics. But a group of leaders like Paul Weyrich, Phyllis Schlafly, Howard Phillips, these were very reactionary folks, and they felt like the Republican Party had become too liberal, too soft on communism. And they were allied with a group of, they called them electronic ministers, people like Jerry Falwell and Robeson and Bob Jones, right? Who wrote that horrible essay called "Is Segregation Scriptural?" And he decided that it was. He said, yes, segregation is scriptural. So what really got these guys up in the morning was a threat that the IRS might revoke the tax exemptions of their segregated schools. And that was like just outrageous to them. They thought that, they had a right to segregate Black people and white people and receive tax privileges for their purpose. But so they were trying to come together and figure out a way to unite their movement. They knew if you can get people to vote on a single issue, you can control their vote, right? That's what abortion's become, that single issue vote. But they knew, like, stop the tax on segregation. That wasn't going to be a very attractive rallying cry for their movement. So they got together and they sort of went down a list of issues. They thought, well, should we think about school prayer and use that as the issue? But they had started to ally with the groups of ultra-conservative, a couple of ultra-conservative Catholic leaders like Richard John Newhouse and Weigel, and that tended to alienate the Catholics. And they thought about, focusing on the women's issues, but the ERA was going down in flames. When they got to abortion, it was like a light bulb went off. And they're like, that could work because it gets to issues about identity. It makes people think about themselves and their families and what they value in themselves. So over time, they actually purged pro-choice voices from the Republican Party. It took a lot of work, a lot of effort. And Phyllis Schlafly, actually, a couple of years before she died, she published, maybe it was the year she died. It was like, I think 2017, she published a book about this. It was an incredible book called How the Republican Party Became Pro-Life. And what it shows is it was really hard. It took a lot of work to get Protestant Republicans to get on the anti-abortion train. But over time, she and folks that she worked with purged these pro-choice voices from the Republican Party, and they were able to actually unite their new movement around the abortion issue. Because if you get people voting on that single issue, you can control their vote. And so that's how a lot of the movement has worked. They've worked through religious infrastructure, through churches. They get the pastors, and then they give the pastors things like voter guides or videos to air at church or sermon starters that all have to do with abortion. It's a single yes or no issue. I try to go every year to the annual National Pro-Life Conference, the March for Life, and other related sort of conferences. And you hear people say, without victory, without unity, there's no victory, and we should be telling our people to be single issue voters because they know that's how they get a lot of people. And look, Bishop Pearson, I think there are a lot of brilliant people all throughout the country. I think there are also a lot of people, yes, who are low information voters, even also throughout the country. But a lot of folks, you're right, do not really tune into politics, but they just think, well, my pastor says, I should vote on abortion, so I'm just going to vote on abortion. That's it for them. And that's how they control their vote. But something that, you were speaking about, Bishop Flunder, as younger people, the movement, I think the reason why they've pivoted to this denial of elections, first they were all in for gerrymandering and voter suppression, like, these ridiculous laws, like you can't bring a glass of water to an elderly person standing in line for 8 hours because she lives in a district where there aren't enough, places to vote. Whereas if you're in a rich white district, you just walk in and cast your vote, whatever. You know what I'm talking about? Like that Georgia stuff, the nonsense that we saw in Georgia. So first they were just trying to make it hard for people whose votes they don't like to vote. Right. And now I think they realize, wow, we're still going to lose. And so that's why they've pivoted to denying the consequences of elections.
That's it.
Like
last ditch effort.
That's it.
Last panic. Now they're going to, I need to say for our audience to know, they are winning a few battles, but ultimately they will not win the war. There's an energy, a lethargy out there where people say, you know what? And I've experienced it here. Why should I even vote? These conservatives own Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas and Missouri, and they got it locked down. But I still need to vote. I still need to be vocal. I still need to roll your vote gently down the street.
Right.
Roll. Y'all didn't get my joke. Anyway, if we don't stay active, and we have to get the word out to encourage, almost demand progressives and Democrats, particularly the African American, to get up off their butts and vote, because there's a lot of discouragement. If Trump is not prosecuted properly, legally, there'll be such a huge depression and discouragement among progressives. In fact, I know some very strong people that are just exhausted. They've been on the front line in the trenches. They're old, they're tired, they're sick. Their kids sacrificed, and they don't see the progress. In fact, they see us going backwards. So we got to give a positive word. We can win the war, even though we may lose a few battles and have lost some in the interim. Ultimately, change is here and coming, and the best is yet to come.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say this book is The Power Worshippers. We still have people that are coming in to the conversation. The author is Katherine Stewart. We are going to give away a book. Type the hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so you can win the copy of the book. Type the hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so you can win a copy of Katherine Stewart's book, the power worshipers. I think it's important for us to say this last thing, because this also is very important to the conversation. You speak about, well, let me just ask the question, Catherine. How did segregation, Bishop Flunder brought it up. I think I heard Bishop Pearson bring it up. So I'm going to ask you, how did segregation fuel the birth of the modern Christian nationalist movement? Because it did.
Yeah.
Segregation and slavery. I mean, there's a through line between the theology of the pro-slavery theologians, their alliance with very wealthy folks, to the sort of pro-segregationist theologians, people like Bob Jones, who called segregation scriptural, and to the Christian nationalist leaders of today, the idea of America as an authentically Christian nation, the idea of hierarchies rooted in God's will, and hostility to equality and pluralism, the idea that of a kind of interpretation of religion that relies on strict obedience, hierarchies of white people over Black people, men over women, there's that. A lot of the leaders today are a little too clever to sort of openly endorse the racism, but they'll still endorse the sexism, although they have some sort of prettified language they use. They say, the same kind of justification that they often use to justify slavery and segregation. Just because God chooses to segregate the races doesn't mean he loves them any less. Or they'll say, just because, God has chosen men and women for different roles doesn't mean, and then women should be subordinate, doesn't mean that, God loves women any less. They have this kind of very pretty language around it, but it's this idea of hierarchies, power, and that they think they call that necessary for an ordered society. And that's, I think, where a lot of the hostility to same-sex relationships and gender equality is from. It's a sort of rage for order. And they see that as necessary for a kind of bring about a more authoritarian form of order. If you start advocating for equality, for human equality, oh gosh, the gig's up.
And we have a new definition now for race. It is a construct. It's not real. Everybody that I'm looking at right now is not fully one thing. That's why I'm saying it's a construct. The fact that we are different hues of African American suggests that our families, Catherine, crossed your families, essentially. And we're not altogether sure what all's going on inside of our, we just kind of know. If we can, go back on some online support, trying to find out what our family tree looks like, I can tell you that I have some low-hanging European American fruit in my family tree. So does Bishop Pearson, and it doesn't take a rocket science person to know. Bishop-elect Vanessa doesn't know which tribes, probably, that she's from.
I did Ancestry.com and 23andMe.
You know your tribe?
But my European fruit is low. Just so you know.
Okay, but you don't know where all of your African fruit is,
no,
right?
I don't. I have
and
no
there was
idea.
a point that those tribes were fighting each other, essentially,
right.
in terms of supremacy and who was, the most, the most. So
Right.
It is a construct that can't be won.
That's correct.
It is already not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you put the Cafe au lait people in this?
Right.
What happens? It sort of
Right.
depends on how you identify, and not. It is no longer a conversation about race. It's just not and just like our European people came from Europe as English, Scottish, Irish, Italian, Spanish. How am I doing with that? Okay. And the Norse folks, just like folks came and then got here and created a whole new race. It's a race that is called white.
Yes.
because it's mostly white. And then like my grandfather, who was a black man who had pink feet, because he was more white than he was black, right?
Yeah.
Well, what was he? He had to choose, because he could have, as we used to say, he could have passed.
Right. Yeah.
So he had to choose. So it is a construct that they are fighting for that doesn't exist. And if we don't do anything else, look at the commercials on television. Look at what they are doing. There's same gender families. There are all sorts of mixed race families. There's all sorts of messaging about adoptive children who are brought into families. The whole thing is useless, because the generations coming after us will have a whole different conversation about what that means.
And they know this. They know
yes,
this.
they know it. Of course they know it.
And they attack those who are against their agenda as atheistic, communistic. They sort of try and
socialistic.
But it's really interesting to note that those same labels have been used over time. Pro-slavery theologians like James Henley Thornwell called abolitionists atheistic, communistic, socialistic.
Wow.
And we're still hearing, and that's how he, and this is how Bob Jones attacked critics of segregation. And this is how a lot of religious nationalist leaders today are attacking their political enemies. They're no longer folks who happen to have a different political viewpoint, or maybe have a different perspective or a different life experience. No, they're.
If you do any research on Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, they had none of those men were able to kill millions of people by themselves. They were enabled. All of Eastern Europe supported Hitler.
Absolutely.
Stalin killed over 20 million people. Today, 70% of Russians still support and think Stalin was a good man. He tortured people. Trump is the same spirit. If they let him get in, he's going to go after all his enemies. He wants our troops marching in front of him. He's such an arrogant, egotistic psychopath. But these Christians mostly are supporting this guy. They have lost their minds, and history will remember that the church gave us the worst president in American history. And it's crystallizing now. It's been here, as you said, Katherine. It's not new. It's been here all along, but it's now amplified. They're coming out of their closet very boldly saying, we want a white-controlled, Christian-controlled, God-fearing country.
Yep. And remember how Hitler ended his life?
Yeah.
Remember how Jim Jones ended his life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We could go on and on and on. It ends the same way.
It's the same way.
It always ends
Same
the same. Yes, it ends the
same. I have one final question for you all, and then I'd like for you all to give me final thoughts. The last question it's for Katherine, but it's also for Bishop Flunder and Bishop Pearson. The power worshipers, will they ever be brought to naught? Is there anything that we can do to stop the power worshipers?
I thank you so much for that great question. I think about the words of Reverend Kelly Brown Douglas. She said, the hope is in the struggle. I think that we have faced horrible episodes in our past. And there are many folks who have faced certainly a lot worse challenges than I'm facing, and people persist and they continue with the struggle. And, I also think about the words of Ralph Reed, that strategist, the religious right strategist. He said, pay no attention to the polls. All that matters is who shows up on election day. And he's absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Voting really matters, and not just in the national elections, also in state elections, also in areas where you think your vote doesn't count. It really, really does. All politics, a lot of politics is local, so it's really important to get engaged in local initiatives, not just in state and national stuff. And I often think that if those of us who reject the politics of conquest and division could do just one little thing more than we did last time. Just bring a friend. Don't just vote, bring a friend. or offer to babysit for a friend so she can go vote, or offer to take an elderly person in your neighborhood, offer to drive them to the polls and give them plenty of water so that they don't have to drink it in line or whatever, just like facilitate voting for others. I think that would really make a difference.
Or don't give them water so they don't have to pee while they're waiting.
Bishop Pearson and Bishop Flunder, power worshipers. Are we going to ever get rid of them? What can we do? And your final comment for tonight. Bishop Pearson.
Me?
Yes, sir.
We won't get rid of them right away. They're ensconced in the psyche of the nation and the culture and the conscience of the people. We're dealing with at least 2,000 years of entrenched indoctrination. And we've been told that we're the chosen, that we're powerful, that we're the Jesus representatives on the planet. And so it's going to take a long time to get through all of that. Even the African-American church, which has listened to the massa and bought into his doctrine, and it's going to take a while. But there's the youth generation is the one that won't buy into it. So I don't expect to change a lot of the minds of the baby boomers like me. But I do believe we need to corral these young people. We need to have them on the program, Vanessa, sometime. We need to have some of these teenagers talking and hear their minds, white, black, Hispanic, and discuss these issues around such delicate subjects as tonight. And we need to start doing that quite regularly.
I love that. Wonderful. Bishop Flunder.
And many of them are authors, by the way. They are that kind of brilliant.
Yeah.
In that 20 to 35, right in there.
We got one coming next week. Dr.
Hallelujah.
Dwayne Francois, Solace and the White Noise. He'll be with us next week.
Great.
Powerful young people. And they are in many ways our hope. And I also say, leave with this. Fear is torment. That's what my grandmother used to say. Fear, Yvette, fear is torment. And I love the passage that said, but God did not give us a spirit of fear. But God has given us the spirit of power and love and a sound mind. Power and love and good sense.
Yeah.
That is what was given to us. And I think what we need to do is fall back on it so that we can know the difference between what really is coming from the heart of God and what is not. And this is where I find my strength, beloved. At the end of the day, I believe in God. At the end of the day, I believe that I have responsibility, but that God has the final word. I believe that with all my heart. I believe there are things that I must do, but I know that I am not doing those things uselessly. Essentially, I can feel the heft and the presence and the power of justice and righteousness in my backbone. And I believe that is true of Bishop Pearson. I believe it is true of our sister Katherine. I believe it is true of Bishop-elect Vanessa. And those of you who are listening to us today, you have a task. You have a job. You have some work to do. And you have the ability to do it.
Good.
Yes, to do it. God bless you.
Thank you all so very much for tonight. Thank you, Katherine Stewart, our author and journalist. You do such great work. People buy the book, The Power Worshipers. If you want to win the book tonight, type hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. We want to support it. We want to support this great work. It's going to take us all together to move us forward into the world that we want to see, right? Into the world that we know that it can be. And so I am convinced tonight that we've had a great program and it was stated the way it's supposed to be, and that you all are going to go out and purchase this book, and you're all going to go out and support this programming. And so what we want to do is we want to show you some commercials before we go to our raffle tonight.
Right quick, there are books for $14 down to $11 on Amazon. You can find this book.
See?
So if you don't get it free when y'all ain't poor, buy the book and read it and pass it on. This one is very critical. We got to get it out there.
That's it. Buy the book. Get the books. Get it for somebody else. Chapter by chapter. It's good reading. Remember, the midterms are coming up. This is information we need to know. This is information that I told her before we came live, that I wish that we could buy a bunch of books and drop it off at folks' churches and have people read them, right? And have book clubs so that people could read and actually talk about what's going on, because Bishop Pearson said something that was very good. People don't really understand. They don't really understand what's at stake, right? You know, they don't have a clue. And so this can help them, give them a clue.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much. And we're going to go to our advertisement now. Bishop
God bless each of you who are with us tonight. And this was a powerful conversation. We are at that point in our work where we can bring change, we can affect change in our world. But we have to care as much about peace as many are essentially determined to destroy our peace. We need to actually care more about justice than those who are determined to take justice away from us. They put their money where their heart is. I suggest that we need to put our money where our heart is. I'm going to encourage you today to give to Beyond the Gatekeepers and keep these broadcasts from essentially not being lost in the milieu that we are in right now. These conversations are vitally important. Support these broadcasts by sending a donation via Cash App to $TFAM Annual, TFAMANNUAL, or to PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. Let's support what brings us life. God bless you is my prayer.
Thank you, Bullet in Flight Radio. Dominic, we appreciate you. If you want to ever hear Beyond the Gatekeepers, we are on Bullet in Flight Radio during the week. It's an online radio station. And we have Antonio Mattier, the lifestyle realtor. And Antonio is encouraging us that if Lifestyle Global Properties will donate 10% of the commission earned from your real estate transaction to your choice of City of Refuge, COR, or TFAM, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, in your name when you utilize their brokerage to purchase or sell a property, residential or commercial, in California or Georgia. You can reach Antonio Mattier by emailing him. You can email him at antonio@antoniomattier.com, or you can check out his website. The website is www.antoniomattier.com. Lifestyle Properties. Thank you for your support. Support Black businesses, please. RIM Virtual Experience, Tuesday Night Talks, TNT. I love that. RIM Fellowship United Church of Christ. They are inviting us every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for everyday, real, relevant, Bible-led conversations. Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams is the senior pastor and the founder of the church. If you want to know more about RIM Fellowship UCC, go to www.rimatlanta.org. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at RIM Fellowship UCC. Thank you for your support. Support Black churches. And we have the Healing Place Apothecary, where Nubian Flunder is the LAC and founder. She is the daughter of our presiding bishop, Bishop Flunder, and she has her own company, her own business, and she's an entrepreneur. The company is called the Healing Place Apothecary. You can go to her website and go to www.thpapothecary.com. That's www.thp, which stands for The Healing Place, apothecary.com. You will find products for your skin and other things on that website. Please support Black businesses. We have Sky Michelle Teas and Things. The Kid Boss just turned 9 years old. This is her company. Go to www.skymichelle.com to support all of the t-shirts. She has new t-shirts out for kids going back to school. She has new t-shirts out for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So many things are happening through Sky Michelle Teas and Things. Follow her on her Facebook page or on her Instagram page at I Am Sky Michelle. Support Black businesses. And we have grab your favorite morning beverage and join us on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, and 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for Inspire by Kara, highlighting BIPOC entrepreneurs, influencers, and creatives on a mission to change their communities and the world. Their host is Sue A. Webley. She's the founder of Kara Solutions, and you can watch her live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and then listen later on Spotify, Amazon Music, and on Google Podcasts. Please check her out on Saturday mornings. Advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers by going to our email address, beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Before we leave, we're going to make sure that we do this raffle. If you are with us, we're going to give away a book. Make sure that you have typed in hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. That's hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. Here we go. Minister Sandy Hudson, you are the winner tonight. And so do me a favor and make sure that you put your name and your full name and address in the Beyond the Gatekeepers page. Make sure that you go to our inbox, our messenger, and make sure that you give us that information so that we can get your book mailed off to you. Congratulations once again. You are the winner of the book, The Power Worshippers by Katherine Stewart. We're going to make sure that you receive your book. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We're looking forward to next week where we have Reverend Dr. Willie Dwayne Francois. He is the author of the new book, Silencing White Noise. It is incredible. He is a millennial, and we are excited for him to be in our presence on next week. Make sure that you share this particular conversation with someone. You can share it all around. The conversation is continuous. Put your comments in, put your statements in that you want to make. We are always going back to look at it. Thank you so much for supporting Beyond the Gatekeepers. Have a great evening, and God bless you.